Good evening, everyone. Excuse me. Good evening. My name is John Hale, and I am a co-chair of this evening's Bread of Life dinner. We are delighted to have each of you with us here tonight. On behalf of the members of the Soren Fellows Program at the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture, I'd like to thank also the DCEC staff and the faculty representatives here this evening for providing this opportunity to share a meal together and consider our roles and responsibilities in building a culture of life, especially inspired and renewed during this Easter season. Happy Easter, everyone. Thank you. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest speaker. Father Jerry Olinger is a priest of the Congregation of Holy Cross who serves as Vice President for Mission Engagement and Church Affairs here at the University of Notre Dame, a role he assumed this past August. In his position, Father Jerry stewards and deepens Notre Dame's Catholic and Holy Cross mission and is the university's liaison to the Congregation of Holy Cross, the U.S. bishops, the USCCB and its affiliates, and the Holy See. He also oversees the Tantur Ecumenical Institute in Jerusalem and the Notre Dame Newman Center for Faith and Reason in Dublin. Previously, Father Jerry served as Vice President for University Relations, Vice President for Student Affairs, and Executive Assistant to the President at the University of Portland in Portland, Oregon, which is a sister school of the University of Notre Dame. He was also a concurrent Assistant Professor of Political Science at Portland's College of Arts and Sciences. A native of Springfield, Pennsylvania, Father Olinger graduated magna cum laude from Notre Dame with a bachelor's degree in history and government. He also earned 2 postgraduate degrees from Notre Dame and is a Juris Doctor cum laude who graduated in 2004, and he earned his MDiv in 2009. After law school, Father Olinger entered formation with the Congregation of Holy Cross and made his final vows in August of 2009 and was ordained a priest in April of 2010. Father Olinger ministers as an in-residence priest in Alumni Hall, so any alumni dogs in the audience know full well the treat we're in for tonight. Joe Kelly. Before taking on the position of Vice President for Mission and Engagement and Church Affairs, he served on Notre Dame's Board of Trustees and currently serves as a member of the Board of Directors for King's College in Pennsylvania. Father Jerry is also a member of the State Bar in Indiana and in Pennsylvania. I find Father Ollinger's words reflecting on his transition back to Notre Dame to assume his current role especially relevant to our time together this evening. He reflected on an experience he shares with all of us of being a student of this university and a member of this community. He said, "Notre Dame has helped me form academically and helped me be formed academically and spiritually, and I look forward to continuing to serve the university and its mission by cultivating the Catholic and Holy Cross mission of Notre Dame and catalyzing its service to the church." Father Olinger, on behalf of the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture, and especially its Soren Fellows Program, we are so grateful not only for your joining us this evening, but for all the ways that in which your tireless work makes our Notre Dame experience, inspired by the founding vision of the Congregation of Holy Cross, the best it can possibly be. Friends, please join me in welcoming Father Jerry Olinger, who will be offering his reflection entitled The Character Project.
Well, thank you to John for that very kind introduction, and thank you as well to Carter and to Pete, to the entire staff of the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture for this invitation tonight. Happy Easter, everyone. So I apologize ahead of time if I start to nod off about halfway through my talk. I was actually in the Holy Lands for Holy Week, which was this great blessing. I arrived on Saturday before Palm Sunday, had an opportunity to participate in the Palm Sunday procession in the Old City, and I came back last night. So I arrived back about 7 o'clock. I had Mass in Alumni Hall at 10 p.m., and I tried to keep myself awake. I actually was falling asleep while I was walking, trying to keep myself at least awake until Mass time. So, but it's great to be with you. I got a good night's sleep last night, so I think I'll be fine for our talk today. So tonight, I want to talk about a topic that's very close to my heart. It's the formation of our character. Something I've thought a lot about in my roles as a vice president for student affairs at the University of Portland, as well as vice president for mission engagement and church affairs here. I'd like to explore with you how we develop and form our own characters, but also how we might be able to apply some of the ways that we think about our own personal character formation to the formation of our larger society, especially around an ethics of life. I'd like to start with a little bit of an unorthodox way. I want to start by asking you some questions. Now, some of these questions are a little bit odd, so I ask you to trust me and stick with me on this. I'm going to switch to our mic. So I'd like you to think about the questions that I pose, but especially about why you might answer the questions in the way you did. So let's get started. So the first question, how would you be most inclined to break off a 3-month relationship with someone you've been seeing steadily? 1, by telephone, 2, over text or social media, 3, in person. So how would you be most inclined to break off a 3-month relationship with someone you've been seeing steadily? By telephone, by social media or text, or in person? Do we have any brave volunteers that want to... I'm not afraid to cold call on people, too. How about this table? Anyone? Yeah?
Do it in person.
In person? And why?
Because I believe in being honest and in front of people.
Okay. Did I hear someone from back here? Yeah?
Yeah, pretty much the same reason. In person, so they know that I care about them.
Okay. All right. Other answers? Anyone not select in person? Now you're going to have to, fess up to it now. Anyone have a different response? All right. So, next question. What would you prefer to be? 1, a prison guard, 2, a garbage collector, or 3, an assembly line worker? What would you prefer to be, a prison guard, a garbage collector, or an assembly line worker? Any brave volunteers for our second question? Yeah?
Definitely an assembly line worker.
Okay, and why?
Because I would not want to take part in restricting the freedom of other people, and I would want to be a part of creating something and not destroying something.
Okay, so being part of creating something? Yeah?
Garbage worker, because you get to be outside and so work out, and you're cleaning up the city. It's not destroying something.
Okay. I like that. Especially, too, you like being outside, being out in nature. Okay. Yeah.
Prison guard, because I want to talk to people.
Okay. So you value kind of those interactions and those personal interactions? One more? Yeah.
I'd be a garbage collector because I am advancing the common good more than I would be on the assembly line doing monotonous work, whereas I'm also not putting my own health and safety at risk as much as if I were a prison guard.
Okay. Great. Thank you. All right, what would you least like to be? 1, a hangman, 2, a member of a firing squad, or 3, the person who pulls a switch on an electric chair? Would you least like to be? I know. You just got to trust me on this one. I gave you the caveat before I started that some of these are a little bit odd. Any thoughts on that one? And I know that all of us would answer none of the above, but that is not an option on this. Yeah?
I would least like to be a hangman because that's the way I would least like to die.
Okay.
I would just like to be the one who flips a switch because I think it's the most, they all result in the same thing, but it's the most abstracted.
Okay.
The actual process that's doing the least seemingly gruesome. And so I think it would be alienating for both the
Okay.
person dying and for the person executing.
So you value, if you're going to be part of something, which obviously is not ideal, that you'd rather be a little closer to the action than being removed from it.
Yeah, in the sense not because I want to,
I get it.
Those are your words. Because if I have to do it, I think I want to admit it to myself and to the person.
Okay.
That this is a gruesome thing and that's the reality of it and we can't hide it in technology.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah.
We're definitely the fire squad thing. You got 2 options: you either miss or you hit him in the head and make it quick for him. So it's both good options.
Yes.
Well, since they're all terrible options, I would have to ask about the benefits, the health benefits.
So say more.
Yes, more.
Any other final responses? Yeah.
I other two are just far more impersonal, whereas that's personal. And whereas, flipping a switch or firing someone is just so much more mechanic and so much you're just taking away that person's dignity as just being another object.
Yeah.
You can flip on a light switch, you can kill an animal the same way, whereas a hangman, you're standing in front of them, and it truly makes it a personal thing. So.
Thank you. Much better question now. What's most important in a friendship? Loyalty, generosity, or honesty? What's most important in a friendship? Loyalty, generosity, or honesty? Yeah.
I think I really value honesty.
Okay. Why is that?
Because honesty is like the foundation of loyalty and trust.
Okay.
And I don't think like dishonest generosity is true generosity. So I
Got it.
think you need one for the other.
Okay. Yes.
I probably say loyalty because I feel like if you know someone's loyal to you and they're not going away, then that opens up more room to have like a really honest discussion. They're there for you no matter what. So in that sense, it kind of is the grounding foundation.
Okay. Thank you. Other responses? Let's do one more. Yeah.
I would say generosity just because I think it's the closest to charity.
Okay. And I know you had your hand up, so you get the final word.
I was also going to say generosity just because I think it's important in a relationship to have each person giving,
Okay.
which I think comes from generosity.
Great. And since you're right in between and you had your hand up, go ahead.
I was actually going to say generosity too. Yeah. We talked in my Theo class today that selfishness is the poison that Satan feeds us. And I think that generosity is the remedy to that and calls you outside of yourself in a way that is neutral.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for sticking with me on the exercise. The questions that I asked were actually the first part of a course I taught at the University of Portland and co-taught with Father Mark Poorman, who had been here for a number of years at the University of Notre Dame, called the Character Project. And so the way that we begin the course is to really start talking about what our values are. And so we have a 200-plus question values inventory. Those were a selection, some interesting questions and some more mundane questions from that values inventory. But I wanted us to start thinking about what our values are, right? And why we value those things. So for example, with the second to last question regarding what you'd least like to be, I had one of the students in our class say that they would least like to be the person who a person who was part of a firing squad, because they said that they were really worried about not knowing whether or not it was their gun who actually did the actual action, and that they didn't want to live with that uncertainty, right? And so for them, the value that they had is kind of that certainty, even though it was a terrible thing and obviously absolutely tragic, that was really important to them. And so it's interesting as we start to look at some of questions like these, how we start thinking about our values in life and how our values start to lead to the decisions that we make. And that the decisions that we make over time become what we call habits, right? So good decisions done repeatedly over time become what we call virtues. And bad decisions done repeatedly over time, becoming habits, become vices. And that the constellation of all of that is what we call and refer to as character. The second part of our course talks about the role of narrative in our moral formation and how all of us are formed within the context of a story, right? So all of us who are Christians are formed within the larger context and story of our Gospels. So with all this background in mind, here's a claim that I'd like to make about our character formation. Our characters must be constructed within the context of freedom and with an end in mind. And I'd like to unpack those three ideas with you tonight. So first, our characters must be constructed. Those questions I asked a moment ago, some experiences in your life led to you to answer them however you did. Maybe it was the influence of your parents or your teachers. Maybe you were formed by an experience of service or by the teachings of the church. We're all influenced too, we must admit, by our own fallen nature, by our human proclivity to some degree of selfishness. We wouldn't be honest with ourselves if we didn't acknowledge that that's part of who we are. The point I'd like to make is that our characters have been formed. They've been shaped. They don't simply emerge at birth. At the same time, we're not powerless in all of this. We have agency in how we form our characters. It's been said that practice makes perfect. I certainly recognize the wisdom in that phrase, but I'd like to amend it a bit. I'd say it this way. Practice makes perfect, and imperfect practice makes imperfect. Practicing, say, being deceitful will make us more deceitful, and probably pretty skilled at it. Or practicing being honest, first in the little things, then in the more important ways, will help us to be more honest. I've spent my entire priesthood and Holy Cross working at Catholic universities, so I've thought quite a bit about how our institutions can also help to shape people's characters. I think it's fair to say that the way I think about this issue and the way that Notre Dame thinks about these issues is different than many other perspectives in higher education. You see, lots of people in higher education have disavowed any responsibility to form our students' characters. They say our job is to teach math or engineering or history. Our job isn't about assisting people to shape their character. And to this, of course, I would say you're wrong. I say wrong not simply because I think all institutions of higher education should focus on forming character, though I certainly think that. I say wrong because whether a college or university wants to shape their students' character or not, they do. Every academic institution signals what its values are, and they therefore shape their students in those values. Most colleges and universities in the U.S. espouse some very admirable values. Examining the world is good. Diligent work tends to lead to success. Most colleges stand by a rigorous honor code, which prohibits cheating. All of this is good. The problem comes in, I think, when an institution pretends to absent itself from the values-forming business, because then it gets sloppy in what it communicates and how it communicates. Assisting students in forming their character should be a principal objective of any college or university, and doing so demands great attention and great care. The second point I want to make tonight is that there are no shortcuts to the hard work of forming one's characters, and it has to be done within the context of freedom. Wouldn't it be great if forming our characters didn't have to be work? Wouldn't it be terrific if some outside force might do this work for us? Perhaps there could be a law which mandates good character, or we could somehow convince God to reverse the freedom he imparted to us in the Garden of Eden. But we all know that our choices must be free. Otherwise, they're not our choices. Now, I've worked with college students long enough to anticipate some questions that emerge from this. So freedom is good, right? And we should all make our own choices, right? So why are there all these rules? Why does Notre Dame have rules? Why does the Catholic Church have rules? Isn't our freedom being impeded by these things? Well, here is a nuanced point that I'd like to make. Rules, rather than limiting us, can actually increase our freedom. Let me illustrate this with an image from the great British thinker G.K. Chesterton. In his book, Orthodoxy, Chesterton takes issue with those who say that Christianity limits people from experiencing pleasure in life. And he uses the example of children playing on a high cliff to illustrate this. As long as there was a wall around the cliff's edge, he writes, the children could fling themselves into every frantic game and make the place the noisiest of nurseries. They run around the cliff with carefree abandon. But if the walls are taken down, if the limits are removed, it leaves the children exposed to the reality of the high cliffs and the danger of falling over the edge. Rather than running around in carefree games, the children ended up huddled in terror in the center of the high cliff, and their fun ceases. You see, my friends, rules and boundaries have an important role in making us flourish. I also think there's a myth in our world today about the opposite, that somehow our happiness can be found in being sort of doing whatever we want, whenever we want. I often share the story. Has anyone heard, this is a little bit of a crazy example, and I'm off script, which is always dangerous. But has anyone ever heard of the story or the show Jersey Shore in this room? All right, a few people, raise your hand if you've seen it. All right. So for those who haven't, it was a show on MTV, and it's about a group of young people who basically live their life down at the shore, right? It's like an eternal summertime, an eternal kind of vacation. And the whole premise of the show is they get to do whatever they want, whenever they want. So they party hard, they sleep with whoever they want. And the idea is that this should be what we're all kind of looking for in life, right? And that this should make us all happy. I can remember when the show first came on, I watched a few episodes. And what was striking to me about that show was the profound sadness in the lives of the characters, right? This thing which was supposed to be most freeing, right? That everyone was supposed to be looking at actually seemed to enslave them into this lifestyle. And they couldn't sort of see enough around what was happening to be able to see that there was something much better on the other side, right? Something much better that they were being invited to. And I think that's the point that Chesterton makes in his book as well. Let me say something else about freedom. I saw a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon recently in which Calvin was taking a test. He was thrilled that it was a true-false test. He says at last, some clarity. Every sentence is either pure, sweet truth or a vile, contemptible lie. One or the other, nothing in between. The next frame has Calvin looking at all the questions with a puzzled look on his face. Finally, he takes out a coin and flips it, letting either heads or tails decide between true and false. Is that true freedom? The freedom to let your adjudication between true and false, good and evil be decided by chance, by whim? Some would say yes. Some would argue that we should be free to choose between good and evil in whatever way we wish. I'd say it's a lot more complicated than that. It's been the consistent teaching of the Catholic Church that when it comes to moral issues, that our choosing must be guided by our conscience, and our conscience must be well formed. Here I'll draw on one of the most important thinkers and leaders of the last century, St. John Paul II, and his critically important encyclical, Veritatis Splendor. John Paul argues that truth exists, and that real truth should inform our conscience. Truth includes scientific truth, what can be observed or discerned from our natural world, though not all truth can be observed empirically. You may know that somebody truly loves you, or that you truly love another person, but you'll not find those facts under a microscope. But that doesn't make them any less true. Our consciences can and must be formed by that sort of truth as well. And I'll add another way that our consciences must be formed, and here I'll cite John Paul II. Quote, Christians have a great help for the formation of conscience in the church and her magisterium. It follows that the authority of the church, when she pronounces on moral questions, in no way undermines the freedom of conscience of Christians. This is so not only because freedom of conscience is never freedom from the truth, but always and only freedom in the truth, but also because the magisterium does not bring to the Christian conscience truths which are extraneous to it. Rather, it brings to light the truths which it ought already to possess, developing them from the starting point of the primordial act of faith. End quote, Veritatis Splendor, paragraph 64. This brings me to my final point. Our characters have to be constructed in the context of freedom and with an end in mind. Heaven's the end that really matters, but there's also a lot of worthwhile ends along the way, including our own joy and the joys of others. John Cardinal Newman, another seminal figure of modern Christianity, said this about our conscience. Conscience has rights because it has duties. In a family or a community or society, we all have duties to each other. Some argue that our principal responsibility to each other is to leave each other alone. Let me do my thing, and I'll let you do yours. I've also heard this referred to as "you do you," one of my least favorite phrases in all of life. I'd say that our Christian faith demands much more of us. In the gospel, Jesus says it quite clearly. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Loving our neighbor, really loving them, means wanting them to be happy, to be fulfilled, to flourish as a member of God's family. Sometimes it means holding our closest friends and family accountable. It means wanting them to make decisions which will lead them through God's grace to heaven. Now, before we go too far down this road, let me caution us. This isn't about being like the Pharisees and scribes. This isn't about self-righteously condemning or callously calling attention to everyone's faults. No, this is about leading and attracting people by personal example. It's about listening to struggles and walking with our friends in the midst of them. And it's about gently encouraging out of love, respecting the other's agency as well as freedom. These are the sorts of duties that Christian living in freedom require. They're the things that Jesus taught us to do. And it's on this point that I want to commend all of you. You're here tonight because of your commitment to a culture of life, particularly the protection of the life of the unborn. In a world that misunderstands the nature of conscience, freedom, and the very nature of truth, you, friends, certainly have an end in mind. The protection of human life is created by God and endowed with an incredible dignity, destined for life to the full in this world and in the next. You're forming your characters in line with the will of God, using your freedom in holy ways, and you're orienting your lives to heaven. But there's work left to do. How do we take this personal formation and begin to apply it to our larger society? How do we help others to form their own characters toward this essential end, especially those who might not be formed in the same way or with the same values? As we begin this week where Notre Dame is celebrating the Evangelium Vitae Award, it strikes me that part of this formation is by holding up exemplars, people who are committed to life, people like Anne Mannion and the people of the Women's Care Center, who are doing this hard work of protecting and enabling life in our communities. I was personally very much influenced by my own experience with the Women's Care Center as a volunteer in the seminary. I would think about how we can share that story and other stories like it with the larger society. And there are other ways to help form our own society in this value of life. And it's on this theme that I'd like to offer a charge to all of you. How will you take your personal commitment to life and translate it to a societal commitment? How will you be leaven in the world beyond your own very good efforts? How can your generation, through your work and prayer and energy, start a revolution for life? This, friends, is the great promise of a gathering like this one. Long after the good food is forgotten and the speaker's words have gone silent, we can all continue the hard work of social, spiritual, and moral change for a world deeply in need. I'd like to conclude tonight with an image from another author named Yuval Levin. In writing about freedom, Levin quoted an easy-to-overlook passage from the book of Exodus. As the Israelites were leaving slavery in Egypt on their way to the Promised Land, Scripture tells us, quote, "Now when Pharaoh let the peoples go, God did not lead them by the way of the Philistines' land, though this was the nearest," end quote. Levin argues that the path to true freedom sometimes requires extra work, extra struggle, extra formation. In fact, that's what our character formation demands, our own personal character formation and the formation of our character of our society. Let's not hesitate to take this more difficult road, to do the hard work that formation of our own character and the character of our society takes. I pray that God will bless you as you continue to follow the path to true freedom and your own personal formation, as well as assist others on this way. I look forward to taking questions and to engaging in an additional conversation about all of these themes after our dinner tonight, but Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for the invitation to join you tonight.